Hey everybody, this is Kenny and
Kenny Squared.
with the sports on the Positive Tip podcast. We are so glad to be back. A lot of great things to talk about. Kenny, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. It's beautiful weather here in Cleveland, so I can't really complain.
Yeah, same here, same here. So, I wanted to start. I don't think we talked about this beforehand in our pre-show. Um, but what happened with Baker Mayfield? Well, they're not playing
Um,
today anyway, right?
no, apparently he was in close contact with someone that tested positive. They didn't really say who, probably because of confidentiality and whatnot. But right now he's on the COVID restricted list. He has to quarantine for at least 5 days. Um, so there's a good chance that he could still play Sunday, but it's also still too early to tell because if he tests positive, then he would probably be out for at least a couple weeks. But right now he's not with the team. But they're also on a bye, so perfect
Okay.
timing.
Yeah, I was gonna say perfect timing. How has he been playing?
Um, Kind of up and down. He's had a couple of really great games. Like he had 5 touchdowns against the Bengals. He's held a couple of the really good teams, like kind of there. But he's also had a few duds. Played horrible against the Ravens. Last week he wasn't really that good against the Raiders. But like I think one of the biggest talks around here is like, is he the long-term solution or not? And I don't know where I stand with that yet. I think he's done a good job. I think he's at least earned another year, especially Nick Chubb should be back next week, so we'll see what happens there. Um, but I don't know. Honestly, like I can't really say that I have a better option out there anyway. I think he's been good. I think he's a good fit for Cleveland, and I
Hmm.
kind of hope that they at least consider him again.
Gotcha. Do you think the Browns will make the playoffs? Okay. And so I think I was asking you, you think the Browns are going to make the playoffs?
Yeah, I think they'll make the playoffs.
Yeah.
I can't see them winning the division. The Steelers, although they're losing last I checked against the Cowboys of all teams, but I think their division is too good to win. But I do think they can go in as a wild card. And if they were to make the playoffs, they would make the playoffs for the first time in I believe 19 years. They have the longest drought of any NFL team.
Yeah. Wow. Those fans are very loyal to them too, the dog pound and everything. So it'll be nice to see
Yeah,
them make the playoffs. Is has they have they taken really well to their new coach?
it seems like it.
Yeah.
Because it looks like before, especially last year, they didn't have much of an identity as far as their offense. Now they seem a lot more like committed to the running game. Nick Chubb has been great. Kareem Hunt, who's been a very good story, very quiet and doing his thing. He's been great. Um, and then a lot of the big plays, whether it was Odell before he got hurt or Jarvis Landry, a lot of them are off the play action. So it's been really good for them. I think they really like the coach. I think it's like a coach that like they actually have respect of. I feel like they didn't respect Hugh Jackson
Yeah.
or Freddie Kitchens for that matter.
Yeah. Freddie Kitchens. um, well, I mean that's good. I can't remember who 19 years ago. I wonder who the quarterback was for the Browns back then. Was it Tim Couch? Maybe I don't remember. We'd have to look that up. But
Yeah.
that's a long dry spell. And the Browns is still one of the teams, right, that hasn't been to the Super Bowl, right? Is it what 4 or 5 teams that still have never been to a Super
Yep.
Bowl? Yeah, and the Browns have such a
That's
rich
great.
history. That's crazy, But because the Browns have such a rich NFL history, but it's like their history, especially since they've been back in the league as the Browns, it hasn't been all that great. So it'll be good to see some success there. Definitely, that city embraces when you've got a good team. They get behind the Indians. They certainly got behind the Cavs back in the day. It seems like back in the day. It's only
Yeah.
a couple of years, but and so I'm sure
It
they're
seems like a while ago though.
like a while ago, right? Yeah. All right, so
Yeah.
we'll keep an eye on that. Hopefully Baker Mayfield is doing well and feels good enough to play. So we're recording this late on a Sunday evening, and so a lot of NFL stuff happened today that neither you or I was able to really see much of. But Alex Smith, man, and this is just I can't believe this guy, and I don't know how well he did or anything like that. And you hate to see him kind of get the job now because the other guy got hurt. And supposedly it's a really, really bad injury. But man, am I happy for him. What are some of your thoughts again with now he's the number one quarterback now?
Yeah, and I think it goes to show just like even if a guy doesn't get a chance right away, give it time, something could happen. Like when the Cowboys signed Andy Dalton, like people were like, "Oh well, he'll like never play," and sure enough, like although he got hurt too, but
He got
he's a
hurt.
guy.
Yeah.
Here's Alex Smith's stats from today though. Um,
Oh,
he had 325 passing yards, one
what?
touchdown, three interceptions.
So he had 3 interceptions. Wow. So there's a little rust there, right?
Yeah,
But 325 yards, that's pretty darn good.
yeah, and they made a comeback. They were down 20-3, and they lost 23-20, which
Wow.
I think might be more of the Giants haven't been the best of teams, but still, I think this kind of, and especially once he gets to start next week, which I'd assume they'll make that official sometime soon. I think
Yeah.
that'll be such like an amazing full circle story
Yeah.
where not only was it the same team, but like he was able to overcome all of the issues. And we talked about that a little while ago, but I think it's
Yeah.
really just an amazing story in general.
And really, I'm rooting for him. I'm just thinking, again, it's still hard to find out about his faith. And at the end of the day, for him, it doesn't matter. For me, I'd like to be able to say, because that just seems like such a God thing to me, what's happened with him. And, just the determination. And I know we're going to get to another story that's not being talked about much in just a little bit, but that is definitely one of those stories that is not being talked about. I think a lot of people might not realize how bad his injury was. If I didn't watch that ESPN special, I wouldn't have known either.
No,
Yeah.
like I heard, oh yeah, he had a couple complications, but like to see the extent of what he had to deal with, it's mind blowing that not only is he alive and can use the leg, but that he's playing football again.
And throwing for 325 yards.
Like, I hope that next week he actually pulls off the win. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be amazing. I think I'd love to see folks talk about that a lot more. I really would. All right, so I'm going to jump into one subject really quick. I'm going to rant a little bit in a good way because this is a positive tip, right? So my Mets have a new owner, and it's been a long time since they've had a new owner. I remember when Doubleday brought the team maybe back in '79, somewhere around there, Nelson Doubleday. And then Wilpon came in as a partner. And then a few years later, it was 50-50. And then, Doubleday sold his shares. And so the Wilpons, I think, since either the late 80s, very early 90s, have been the sole owners of the Mets. And so now they've got a new owner, which is great. But it's great from this point of view, right? When I started to think about what's been wrong with the Mets, right, all these years, because it's been really, really inconsistent, I think it's just culture. And it's not a winning culture. Like there always seems to be something that goes wrong. And then everybody scrambles. It's like nobody, takes full ownership accountability of, hey, this went wrong, but here's how we're going to fix it. And listen, if you've only been in the playoffs, which I think it's only been 3 times in 17 years or something like that, something definitely is wrong. And a lot of those seasons have been losing seasons. And I think a lot of the Met fans are like me. They're, just like you're really loyal to the Yankees, I'm really loyal to the Mets, but we almost, And I think all the Met fans will like me in that sense, but I think all the Met fans also like me in this sense. We almost expect something to go wrong. And it's like, because inevitably something always, I mean, this season was like a microcosm of it. Like everything went wrong from Cespedes and, they never really got on track. The pitchers that they got just didn't pan out. It was, and so I think sometimes there could be that one spark, that one change at the top that sparks a whole different culture shift, because again, I think the core of this team, I've never been more happy about or excited about since probably the Darryl Strawberry, Dwight Gooden, days, and even, Jose Reyes and David Wright. When you think about Alonso and McNeil, JD Davis, and still having Jacob deGrom in his prime, and even Edwin Diaz did extremely well last year after, terrible first year. I'm really Dominic Smith, the way he came along. I mean, they just have that young core still that, on the surface add a piece or two. And I think they have a good manager. But then what was the disconnect? What went wrong? And maybe ownership, bringing back Sandy Alderson, I like that. I like Sandy Alderson. Sandy Alderson, though, is he was kind of the first guy that really looked at the metrics and, even before Billy Beane. I mean, Billy Beane was underneath him, but
yeah,
I mean, like sometimes you got to throw those out and just sign a great player. And he really did with Cespedes, right? And obviously it didn't pan out totally, but Cespedes took us to the playoffs twice, So anyway, I just think that when I start to think about culture and the culture in specific churches and the church community, cultures, different cultures in our country, and you sometimes look at the roots of those and how they came about, and some of that can be difficult to really look up and kind of come to that conclusion, right? But some of it goes back to biblical times, even specific cultures and traditions and stuff like that. But you then translate that into sports, and why is it that there are some teams that no matter what, their culture always seems to be winning? If they don't, we talk about the Oakland A's a lot, and while they're winning in the regular season and not in the postseason, you can kill them for that. But there's a winning culture there. They just seems to be a next man up. Tampa Bay, same thing. They always seem to be in it. The Dodgers, even, that they have money, but they seem to spend it pretty wisely. Baltimore Orioles is like the opposite. For a long time, when I was a kid in the 60s, 70s, the Orioles were great every year, and then they lost something, and then they got it back for a while, and now they've just been. I mean, their culture is like terrible now. So the Mets have just been so up and down, and so I just want to see stability. Be consistent every year. Get a contending team there, and then take that ownership and accountability. And I'm not saying just fire people, all the time. I don't think that works either. I think you have to give a manager, at least 3 years to really grow into the job. And sometimes as fans, you just got to be patient. But I'm excited. I think that, Cohen probably wants to win. I think he does have a lot of money, but I was telling you kind of before we got on the Zoom call here that I just don't think that a lot of teams are going to be spending a ton of money. They haven't made any money, so
yeah.
I'd love to say, hey, bring Francisco Lindor here to the Mets. I know you want to say differently.
He could be the Mookie Betts for the Yankees there. He could be the difference maker. But I agree.
Yeah. Hey, George Springer, I'd love to have him on the Mets. I know he's with the Astros and when they cheated, but I think, he proved last year he's a big time postseason player as well. So, but I just don't know that, Cohen would probably have to go into his own coffers to sign some of these guys. And maybe he wants to make a splash right away. I don't know that that's always the way to build. I like the way they've been building the last few years, with guys that were homegrown. I love seeing that. Again, it's been 3 or 4 times in the Mets history where they've done that, with Tom Seaver and Jerry Kuzman back in the 60s and 70s, and Cleon Jones, all those guys came from the Mets. And then, of course, in the 80s with, Gooden and Strawberry, and there were and they added pieces, around them, Keith Hernandez, Gary Carter. But then in the thousands, I mean, they built right around Reyes and Wright, and that was a cornerstone for a long time, And then you added the pieces of Beltran and Pedro Martinez and players like that. But I don't think just signing a big free agent is the way to go. That didn't work with Bobby Bonilla and Eddie Murray and, in those teams in the early night, Vince Coleman, Prince Saberhagen. Well, Saberhagen was a trade, but Saberhagen just had one great year, and then he was a bust after that year. So anyway, that's my rant on the Mets.
Yeah.
I think, what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a good culture change in general. I agree. Like you had mentioned some of the baseball teams, but I look at football, look at teams like the Steelers. Why does it never seem like the Steelers are like losing? You look at the Patriots the last 20 years. I know before that they were really bad, and well, this year hasn't been their best. But there are certain teams that no matter what happens, they always seem to breathe that winning culture, and I think having an ownership change will really help that with the Mets. Honestly, we'll talk about the NBA free agency, but I think even baseball free agency is going to be really weird. Because it'll be interesting to see if there were 6 guys that got a qualifying offer. I don't know them all offhand. Springer was one of them. Trevor Bauer, DJ LeMahieu. I think Marcus Stroman too, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And some of these guys, if I were them, I'd take it because wait a year, continue to build your stock, and then sign a big deal. But Garrett Cole got over $300 million last year. Year before, Manny Machado and Bryce Harper. No one's getting that this year.
No. I mean, there's going to be one dumb owner that'll do that. And I hate to say dumb, but that seems to happen all the time. I can't see it happening now. I just not with, the atmosphere that happened. Hey, so switch gears for a second. You still with me, Ken? So, let's jump into something you wanted to talk about. I think it was really, really interesting. Kansas City Chiefs. So what are some of your thoughts? You sent me a text earlier in the week, and you wanted to really kind of highlight what they're doing.
Well, I think the Chiefs are probably one of the most interesting defending champions out there because, they won today, won a very tight game. They're 8-1, and no one's really talking about them.
Yeah.
To me, it's just kind of surprising. Patrick Mahomes, I just looked up his stats. He has 21 touchdowns and 1 interception this year. But yet, no one ever talks about him when it comes to the MVP race. Everyone's saying Russell Wilson, who the Seahawks lost a bad game today. Kyler Murray is kind of the cool pick for a lot of people too. But Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, they're defending champions. And they're also it's not they're you can make a good argument, especially if the Steelers lose, that they're the best team in the league. And yet it seems like no one's really talking about them right now.
Why do you think that is?
I think maybe because they've already won, it's kind of old news. I think more people are probably talking about say Lamar Jackson and was he a one-hit wonder? I think maybe it's just kind of a boring story for a lot of people to say oh yeah, the Chiefs are just good again. I think of the Patriots, a few of those times where they weren't accused of cheating and they're just the best team in the league by far. I feel kind of because of that, they've gone under the radar. But also the Chiefs are really, really good.
Yeah. And they were able to keep a lot of their good players, which I think is so important too. In the NFL, typically there's a lot of turnover, but they were really able to keep a lot of their solid players. Mahomes is just he's just amazing. I have to say, obviously, in my lifetime, I've seen a lot of great quarterbacks. I'm not ready to call him the best ever or anything like that. But when it comes to uniqueness and consistency, I mean, first of all, as a fan, he's just a really exciting player to watch. I mean, you just never know what he's going to do. I mean, but he's not your typical scrambling quarterback. It's just he can throw with such accuracy and, sometimes behind his body at different angles. I've never seen anything like him. And he's 21 touchdowns, 1 interception. That's spectacular.
Yeah. Like, that's impressive.
Yeah. So has there, I have a thought here, and maybe because I just haven't followed it as closely. Have the Chiefs had a really signature game win this year? Like, I wonder if they play the Steelers before the year is out. But like, have they beaten a team that would be almost as equal to them so far this year? I mean, and I can't think off the top of my head. Like, do they play Seattle this year? So I'm thinking of some of the teams that have gotten out of the gates really, really fast.
They beat the Ravens, which
Okay,
I think
right.
they spoke more about the Ravens losing. Upcoming, they lost. Their only loss was to the Raiders, who they play in 2 weeks, and then they play the Bucks, which that'll be a very interesting matchup.
Okay. That'll be so. Maybe it's still. I mean, we're at the halfway mark, right? A little past the halfway mark in football. So
yeah.
It's not early, but I think that if they beat Tampa, I'm sure that's a nationally televised game. Is that a Sunday night or Monday night or? Yeah.
That's Sunday 4:25.
Oh, 4:25. Okay, but that's good. I think there'll be. I love that 4:25 game. I always like that better than the night game. But I think that we'll really see. I think it'll pick up. I think the amazement that is Patrick Mahomes will pick up, especially after a game like that. If they go out and they beat, soundly beat, and he outperforms Tom Brady, I think you'll start to hear more of the Chiefs.
Yeah, and also I think there's just so much out there with the idea of being like undervalued and underappreciated. Like, not to say that they're being underappreciated, but like sometimes flying under the radar can really like throw people off. But like Jesus was under the radar for 30 years.
Yeah.
So I think sometimes like when it comes to our walk with God, there are times where we're like really out there and like everyone's looking at what we're doing. But sometimes like God works also when we're under the radar.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to talk about a story that we both read this week. Speaking of, we transitioned to God, which was great. And I tell you, I literally had tears in my eyes. I was definitely choked up reading the story about the coach of Stanford University, David Shaw. So speaking of under the radar, I honestly had not really heard much of David Shaw. I knew Stanford year in and year out. They're usually in contention. Like, I don't remember if they've gotten to the final playoff thing. They probably haven't since it's been, but they seem to be always like good, right? And sort of a little bit like Notre Dame, right? The academic standards and Ivy League. It's not easy to be consistently good in these universities where the academic standards are really high. It's just a fact for whatever reason. But he seems to maintain a pretty consistent program. And I didn't realize he's been the coach there now since 2011, which he succeeded Jim Harbaugh, there. And so story this week, totally human story about his younger brother, all of a sudden just coming down with these horrible lesions on his body, all over the place. And doctors can't figure out what it is. And, it continues to get worse and get worse. And it turns out he has this rare form of cancer. I don't remember exactly the name of it. I should have written it down, but it's not a cancer that a lot of people get. and it took them a while to diagnose it. And so what was heartbreaking in that story also was how it took a long time to find. They couldn't find a donor match because he needed a blood bone marrow transplant, and that's difficult from what I understand. That can also be painful for the test as well as when you actually give it. I have no idea what that entails, but this guy went through agony for a couple of years, and finally when they diagnose it, it's grim, right? The news is like, this guy's not going to make it. And so his brother David was not a match for him at first, and he wasn't a match when he took a second test, except they said it's a less than 50% chance that you'll be a match. And he wound up, what did David do? David still wound up going through with it. He said 50% is not zero, I think is what exactly he said. So we're going to go ahead and go through with it. And miracle of God here, it turned out that, when they did the bone marrow transplant, it took, and it actually worked, on his brother. And his brother now, I don't want to say he's totally fine, but he's relatively healthy. He survived. And the story really talked about how David Shaw kind of kept this to him, right? There was a lot of times he had to go travel. He didn't want to burden the team with telling them what he was actually going through with his brother. His brother several times was near death. And, in the article, I shouldn't be always looking for this, right? But I'm looking for God's being, the glory of God being mentioned in there. And they mentioned it several times during the article. And the amount of prayers that this guy had, his brother had, it was just unbelievable. But the fact that a less than 50% chance of it being a match, and I think it said somewhere in the article that like 99% of the time, when it's less than 50%, it doesn't work out. Well, they were that 1% that actually worked out. And what an amazing, story of just perseverance, of love, of being blood brothers now, really blood brothers. And the story just really touched me. And it's certainly a lot of biblical perspectives in there. But let me pause there and want to hear your thoughts. I know you had read the article as well.
Yeah, like you had said, there's a lot of things that really can stick out to you in this story. I'm gonna read a little bit of an excerpt that really kind of got my attention a lot. The doctors had lost all hope. There was nothing left. But we were in the deepest part of the valley, and there was nobody there but God. I said, "You're going to take me off this earth?" And he told me, "Eric, you're not going to die." At that was the point at which my faith really took over, and I had true peace. In the middle of that whole battle, in the middle of just having a lot of chaos around him, he was able to find peace even though he didn't find an answer. And I think that really speaks a lot to, it reminds me a lot of your story. But I think also it just shows how, regardless of what's going on in people's lives, God can still have that type of peace. It reminds me of the verse in Psalms, I believe it is, where it says, "Be still and know that I am God."
Yeah.
Sometimes in the midst of chaos, in the midst of craziness, sometimes we just got to be still and let God speak to us. And it's through that the miracle actually happened. And
Yeah.
I think the other thing that spoke to me a lot was when when he had said after a big win, he was like, "This is for my brother." And everyone was kind of like, "Wait, what's going on?" But
Yeah.
his brother really he took that to heart, because he was he never really talks about it with other people. So he knows that he's thinking about him. And I think that's really important.
It really is. And so, we see in a so-called sports story, right, that where else could Eric turn to? You know what I mean? He just is no one there. He's in this deep valley. You know, doctors have basically given up. That's strong language. Maybe they didn't give up, but I think they were just trying to be honest, you know, with him. But his family that never gave up. You know, obviously David never gave up, and that is a God thing. And you talk about being still. It sounds like that was the moment where he was still, and he that probably was the moment he knew that God wasn't going to take him, you know, at that time. So he probably went into that surgery, you know, thinking, hey, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to be fine. No one else did, but probably him and David, you know, did. It's an amazing story. I would have to say you could find it really easily. Just Google David Shaw, and you want some inspiration. It's a long story for ESPN. It took me a good like 10, 15 minutes to read it at least. So it goes into great detail. The writer just did a phenomenal job, really detailing every aspect. What a great human story I thought it was in the world of sports, you know. So yeah, and you summed it up great with the scripture. So how about we wait the NBA on next week, because we're at the 30-minute mark, and I think maybe we can open with the NBA. We want to talk a little bit about rest, and the NBA looking to start December 22nd. I don't think it's a great idea, but I want to hear your opinion. We'll get to it next week. So let me get some music going here. And so some great things. Ken, thanks so much for the time. Alex Smith, the Mets, the Chiefs, David Shaw. Hopefully you've left this podcast, if you listen, hopefully you left a little bit inspired, because these are some really inspiring stories that you can find anywhere. All right. So for now, this is Kenny and
Kenny Squared
with the Sports on the Positive Tip podcast. We will talk to you next week. Right, Ken?
Yep. We'll be here.
All right, man.